Hello everyone, my name is Meeres and I'm here today to give you a mini guide on how to plan your M+ routes, what you should expect in a dungeon, how you should plan around your group comp, what to do with prides, whatnot, some small tips and tricks here and there. Hope you enjoy it. Jumping right into the game. What I want to do today with you guys is basically explain how to use MDT the most efficient way, what you should know about your group comms, how you should plan around prides, and what basically your idea should be going into a dungeon. With this, I want to start off giving a small and quick rundown of MDT, what is an add-on made by Nogi, one of our players in Echo, and he put a lot of effort and time into the add-on, basically mapping out every single mob in every single Shadowlands dungeon with all the abilities and the count that it gives, in what position it is and what it does. Basically with this add-on you have the perfect overview of the dungeon before even going into the dungeon. What helps you a lot planning your route or thinking about what you should do in your group comp. This add-on is free for everyone, and if you don't have it yet you can download it on CurseForge. If you have the add-on already and you are going into a group and you want to use MDT, you just open it up and then you can basically, like here, we are in prideful right now, you can basically see the whole dungeon layout, every single mob where it is and what it does, plus all the M+ weeks with their affixes. Very helpful to determine what affixes are in the current week and what you might need to consider in your routing regarding affixes. I want to start off with how do you even start making routes? What is your baseline idea? What do you need to know? There are two really important things when it comes to routing and if you want to make your dungeon the most efficient way. And that is once the affixes in the current week, they're very important, and also your group composition. Your group composition is basically the main thing when it comes to planning out damage cooldowns, healing cooldowns, also tank survivability. All these things play a really important role when it comes to every dungeon. But on the other hand, what is also really important is if you have really bad affixes or really good affixes, you can risk more in a dungeon, risk less. You need to pull smaller. Certain mobs you can't really play anymore because of, for example, bowstring. You are getting into a situation where you pull a mob and has like 10 smallies around it and will get bolstered. So you might need to change stuff up. But the most important thing is tyrannical and fortified. Even though tyrannical got nerfed, it's still really impactful regarding the boss HP. And the same goes with fortified. Having a fortified week basically makes it so you want to play more trash at a time and use big cooldowns on a lot of trash mobs because you will get a lot of value out of it. Bosses will be way easier and you will need to most likely assign less overall tank or healing cooldowns on a boss than you need on a trash pack. So keep that in mind going forward into the explanation on how do you plan out your cooldowns and routing. Let's go for an example. So let's say we have a Guardian Druid, a Fire Mage, a Rogue, and a Shadow. Here you need to, if you want to make a route for these kind of group setups, here you need to take into account what do the classes even do. You have a Guardian Druid who has a really big cooldown every 3 minutes. You have a Mage who has like a cooldown every minute. You have a Shadow Priest who has constant damage, but also a lot of single target damage, plus a Rogue, most likely, let's say it's Outlaw. Most likely an Outlaw Rogue who has damage all the time. So that's perfect. With this group comp, you can go forward and say, okay, how do you want to do it? And that's basically what I want to explain. For example, I'm going to look at the dungeon here and say, oh, so we have cooldowns in the beginning of the dungeon. That's always really important. I think a lot of people underestimate the value of beginning of dungeon pulls. I see a lot of packs skip this whole area, as Plagueful as an example, because these mobs are very hard. But it might be worth doing one big pull in the beginning, because you have all cooldowns ready. Your Guardian Druid has the big 3-minute cooldowns. Your Mage has all cooldowns as well. You have the Shadow who can single target down one mob, and you have every ability ready that you want to use and get it on cooldown with. So here, I want to give a quick rundown on how you should approach packs if you don't really know what they do or how you should handle them. Best example are basically these 4 mobs. That's why we're here in Plagueful. You have one big patrolling mob that does, when you right click in MDT, you can see what it does. It does the creepy crawlers and has a toxic pool on the ground. And he has a lot of HP, as you can see here. We are in an 18 fortified setting at the moment. Then you look at the other 3 mobs. They have, as you can see, a 530k HP, 350k, and 350k. This means you basically have 1 really big target, 1 mediocre target, and 2 really small targets. So, how do you plan out? You would say, oh yeah, we have a Shadow Priest, he will most likely try to focus the Flash Giant. And the Fire Mage, he needs to focus the Fungal Mancer with his little bonus single target damage that he has when he AoEs. Placing DPS cooldowns and whatnot going into the pack is really important. But what is most of the time underrated by a lot of packs and also guild groups or whatever, also when we are doing our weekly keys is Super Fiesta a lot of times, is the importance of interrupting and stopping cast in keys. If you look at these mobs here, for example, looking at my playter, I have them recolored regarding what they do. You can see here, the yellow nameplate is an interrupt mob. Interrupt mobs are really important depending on what they do. This Fungal Mancer, for example, has 2 spells that you want to interrupt. One is not really that important, but the other one is really annoying because it puts roots on the ground. So let's look at the pack. You have 1 big mob that you need to interrupt. You have 1 interrupt mob and out of nowhere sneaking in the Stormer. The Stormer is a very dangerous mob because he has, as you can see here, also a different nameplate color. What does that mean? He is in some way important in this pull. To explain it, as you can see in the background, he does a Fungi Storm. This is an ability that a lot of people underestimate or actually happens in a lot of dungeons. It's not a kickable ability, it's just an ability that you need to stun or disorient, disrupt, whatever you want to do, because it does AoE damage to the group, but you can't kick it. So it's not really that easy to handle. A lot of people forget that they have a lot of things in their utility kit. For example, I could incap it, I could leg sweep it, I could do a lot of things to it. Same with for example, the Guardian Druid can incap right, the Shadow can fear it, and so on. These kind of things and small things are really important when you're going into a dungeon and you plan out on how to do your pulls. Basically, looking at this, you see, oh yeah, let's say I want to do a double pull because we're doing a lower key tonight. And we're doing like a 14 weekly key, but we have a lot of gear as a group. So let's see. We're pulling a pack that has 1 big interrupt mob that we need to focus, 2 Fungal Mancers, 2 interrupt targets, a Harvester and a Fungal Mancer, and 2 Fungi Storms. This is basically a pull that can die really easily if you plan and talk to your team what to do on certain mobs. Also, or on the other hand rather, you can also wipe instantly on the pull because no one stops the Fungi Storm, interrupts anything, and then it's just a big clown fiesta. Everyone knows it. So these kind of things are really important going into a pull or a dungeon if you want to plan out your route. So when you open MDT, you can see here, basically every single mob in this dungeon is relevant in one way or another. You can see here these mobs, I just explained them. Then you go further into the dungeon. You see here these mobs, they have basically an aura that you need to spell steal. These mobs here, they really don't do a lot. They do these claws. But you need to understand, going into these kind of pulls, especially let's say we have the Guardian Druid still in the group, and we're doing like a higher key. He doesn't really have a lot of magic damage reduction that is passive. And you know after experiencing it once or twice and seeing this mob that he completely destroys the tank with his claw ability. So you need to plan out, okay, we cannot randomly start pulling 5 claws that will just destroy the tank. We need to keep in our head, okay, we have a Guardian Druid tank, he might not have a lot of cooldowns. We might need to play this guy and these smallies here first, then play the claws, or we plan it out so we have more cooldowns going into the claws, or together with the Spinebreaker so we can live it. And all of these things kind of play an important role going into planning a dungeon or a pull. As I said, the most important thing here is the affixes. Like I said earlier, I want to touch on the affixes now. Here, really important to know is obviously if you have Tyrannical, for example, these mobs will hurt so little compared to when you have Fortified, which makes it so you could, for example, say, okay, we have Fortified. We can easily add this Plague Rogue and the Plague Boros on top of the pull because we have the same amount of cooldowns, but they do way little damage or way less damage. But on another hand, it's also like people underestimate Tyrannical or in terms of what they need for bosses, and they go into a big trash pull, they pull the world, use all their cooldowns, and then go into the boss, and then they wipe to the boss. So you always need to have it on a scale to see, okay, what do you want to do? Do you want to kill the boss really fast? Do you want to kill the trash fast and have a longer boss because the boss is easier or whatnot? That all comes a lot of with the experience. Basically, sadly, I cannot cover it in this video because it is such a big topic and you would need to have a separate guide for every single dungeon. That's why I'm only giving you prideful mobs as an example. But one thing that mixes everything up basically, and what is the biggest topic in the first Shadowlands dungeons, or in season 1 rather, and that is a prideful buff. To my extent, what I heard or whatnot is that people really underestimate prideful buffs. Prideful buffs can be so useful in two regards. They can help you regenerate your mana on the healer and make a pull super easy, or make it so you have so much damage that you can skip certain abilities of bosses and don't need to play them. Both of these things are really important, going from fortified to tyrannical. Most of the time, what people don't do is they have they proc a pride and then they do like a small pull because they didn't really plan out their route. Or they do a really big pull, invest all their cooldowns into the pull, then do the pride and they don't have cooldowns back. So they have like a pride without cooldowns, or they even are dying to the pride, so they need to use emergency cooldowns on a pride. Here it's important to know that when you do your routing, let's say we're playing all of these mobs in the beginning and we're proccing a pride. As you can see here, MDT indicates you when you proc a pride on 21% and 20%, and then this icon appears. So let's say we would play all of these mobs, obviously not in one pull, but one after another, and then we get a pride. So what do you want to do with this pride? On a fortified week, it is most likely the case that you want to use maybe one small cooldown on the pride. A mage is basically the perfect class. Also, Shadow is pretty good on a pride. Use a small cooldown on the pride so you guarantee a kill on the pride without using a lot of cooldowns on it. And then you move on and you say, okay, we killed the pride, we got our cooldowns back, or we have it so we get them back into the pride buff. And then you go here into the big room. You can play all the slams and maybe one Plague Belcher as well, because you have the pride buff, and the pride buff basically gives you so much utility. It gives you movement speed, it gives you mana and damage. It's basically all the things that you want in M+ to succeed in a hard pull. So here you need to plan it out. But let's say we're not in a fortified week. Doing this would not be optimal, because you want to use your pride most of the time on a boss with Bloodlust. Or in general, you want to pair up prides with Bloodlust or cooldowns in any scenario. So let's say we are in a tyrannical week, like here, and we're playing the trash, and then we're proccing a pride from these mobs here. From these mobs. Which means, okay, we get a pride for the boss, that's perfect. But now you need to think about how you want to split up these mobs so you don't overuse all your cooldowns and you end up with a pride on the boss with Bloodlust, but you don't have cooldowns. People underestimate the value of having a pride plus Bloodlust on a boss on tyrannical, or same goes for a pride plus cooldowns on fortified trash. The amount of value and time and safety you gain from having all of these things paired up is really big. Especially in packs when you approach a really hard pull, for example, this pull down here, as I said, where the tank is really in danger and you can basically help the tank out by having so much damage that they only basically do one ability, the tank only needs to lift them one time and then you can move on. This basically helps a lot. And these kind of things are really important in my eyes going into a dungeon, and how to plan out or think about how you want to plan your route. Like as a recommendation for me, is the most important thing is when I go into a dungeon or when we do anything, is you need to look, it's fortified tyrannical, is it bolstering, then you obviously need to change up a lot of things, or basically explosive and bursting as well. All of these little affixes have an impact, but that comes a lot with the experience, what you want to do and what you want to pull. But what you can learn as a person who wants to make MDTs or look at their route or what you want to pull or whatnot, is to understand the single mobs of the dungeon and what your group members and on certain classes can do on these mobs. For example, if you have a Demon Hunter tank on these Slime Claws, he has a way easier time than, for example, a Prot Warrior or a Prot Paladin. All of these classes that don't have really good toolkits against these kind of things need to be considered going into a pull. So looking at your group comp, I think is my number one priority when you go into the dungeon or when you want to do puts. Same goes when you look at the affixes, that you don't underestimate fortified and tyrannical, or also the pride buff. I think that covers almost everything I wanted to explain in this short video. It was basically a mini guide going into M plus and what to, like, small tips and tricks in M plus, and what you should basically have in your mind going into the dungeon. But also, if you enjoy what I just explained, kinda, for the really few mobs in Plaguefall, there's a good chance that we can continue the series going into other dungeons and maybe doing a quick dungeon rundown for every single dungeon and explain how it works, how the mobs work, what you should look at every mob, what they should do, what you should, how you should handle them, and how you can outplay them, for example. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. And don't forget to like and subscribe.